Very good. Thank you, George. Thank you, the foundation, and my, oh, I was going to say old friends, but I just say friends of many years that I see. Excuse me. George and I have been doing this for at least 7 years, and normally I really do focus on Macau. In fact, those of you who were here last year may remember I accurately predicted that there was going to be the beginning of a trade war with China, which we hope will not get worse. But when we were putting this together, I told Professor Godino that a very important case was pending in front of the United States Supreme Court, and it would probably be decided by the end of June. I did not realize it was going to be decided 2 days ago. And this is the first time I have spoken about it anywhere. I got all these requests to give interviews, but they all came in at 2 and 3 in the morning because of the time zones. So, and I have written about this case. I wrote about it, well, actually I've written about it, the whole, actually the case and companion cases for years. But last year, I wrote a paper calling this the most important case of the century. And it is on my website, on gamblingandthelaw.com, so you can see what I was predicting, which in fact came true. I even thought it would be a 6-3 decision, which is what happened. Well, one of the things you learn in law, as in politics, is to count votes. Lawyers, to explain really difficult concepts, we often use hypotheticals that are kind of crazy. Particularly if you're a law professor, you can do that. And so I want to help explain this. I actually thought I would be the only one to say this, but let's take the hypothetical that Hong Kong decides to legalize casinos, which isn't going to happen, at least not too soon, right? But let's say tomorrow Hong Kong decides to legalize casinos, and the PRC government in Beijing says, and could be the People's Congress, they simply say, no, you cannot do that. Well, you are not allowed to authorize and regulate casinos. So Hong Kong, which really wants to have casinos, said, okay, then what we'll do is we'll decriminalize it. We will simply eliminate all of the laws against casino gambling. And the central government in Beijing says, no, you can't do that either. That is basically what happened here. The state of New Jersey wanted to legalize sports betting. The problem was the US Federal Congress in 1992 said states could not change their laws about sports betting. There will be no new sports betting, but we'll grandfather in like states like Nevada that already have it. So they said, okay, but we're going to authorize it. The federal courts said, no, you can't. And then the state legislature of New Jersey said, well, then we'll just decriminalize it. And they passed a law saying it was no longer a crime to have sports betting in New Jersey, at least in casinos and racetracks. I mean, this is crazy stuff. And the problem for the opponents, which were the football leagues and the National Collegiate Athletic Association, was the federal courts now said, yeah, the federal government can tell a state, sorry, you have to keep an activity illegal. You have to keep sports betting illegal. And this would be like Beijing telling Hong Kong, you have to keep casino gambling illegal, even though actually they've got the legal right, they don't have to. That's the reason this case went to the United States Supreme Court, is partly because it was such a weird situation. Couple things. The federal statute that is at issue is, everybody calls it PASPA. It was the Federal and Amateur Sports Protection Act, 1992, and it simply froze sports bet. All the states were frozen. Imagine we're in the 1920s and they started inventing sound with movies. And the federal government passed a law saying, I'm sorry, only 6 states can have talkies. No movies other than in Nevada can have sound. I mean, that's how crazy this was. It was called Christie versus the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And one of the ironies is poor Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, ran for president and lost. And then they have a new governor, so they changed the name of the case. And for years, it was the Christie case. Christie 1, Christie 2. Now it's the Murphy case. And in history, this won't be remembered. But this is a really, really major decision. What everybody knows, and they're kind of getting it wrong sometimes, is it allows the states to have sports betting. It does not legalize sports betting. It allows the states, all 50 states, each one of them can decide, are they going to have sports betting? Goes beyond that. It actually says the states can legalize any form of gambling. So, and they're going to begin to realize that soon. But more than that, this is the first time the U.S. Supreme Court has said the federal government cannot order state governments to do anything. So if you start thinking about the relationship between states and federal governments, not all over the world, and I guess to some extent, special administrative regions and central governments, this says, yes, the federal government can act on individuals, but they can't act on state governments or even state officials. The reason is, and the reason this happened was the American Revolution. There were 13 colonies. They fought and won a war of independence against the King of England. They then were all separate. They were nations. They were little nations, and they realized they couldn't survive fights with the superpowers of the time, England, France, and Spain. So if they were individuals, so they had to form a federation. They created a new government. They created the U.S. federal government, but they only gave the federal government some power. For example, in the United States, only the federal government can issue currency. California can't have patakas. They can't have their own currency. But they gave some power, but not all the power. And what the U.S., and I've been teaching this for years, this is just the first time the Supreme Court has expressly come out and said they're still sovereigns. And if it isn't in, and so one thing it's hard to realize in the age of television, states have unlimited power unless they gave it up. The federal government is the one that has limited power. The U.S. federal government, every part, the president, the Supreme Court, Congress, they only have the power to do what is listed in the U.S. Constitution. It's called a government of enumerated powers. And what the Supreme Court made very clear is, if you look at the list, it doesn't say that they can order states to do anything. Why did they do this? Interestingly, and this I think is really significant, they talked about the federal government forcing the states to have financial burdens. But the first and most important reason to prevent tyranny, and given kind of what's going on around the world, this is an interesting statement. This is from the opinion itself. The point of this doctrine, that the federal government cannot tell the states to do anything, is not just to protect the state governments, it's to protect individuals, because if you have this balance of powers, you have the states and the federal government with different powers, and the federal government can't tell the state to do anything, the states can't tell the federal government to do anything, that will reduce the risk of tyranny from either one, from federal government and state governments against individuals. So who's going to win on this? We're looking at this for the very first time, right? Clearly, casinos and the tourist business, where they don't have sports betting now, but they will as soon as they pass new legislation. So Atlantic City, in fact, there's no legal sports betting east of the Mississippi. In fact, there's no legal sports betting east of Nevada. Well, now every single state can have it, and they're most likely to give licenses to casinos and racetracks. That's usually what happens when something like this occurs. We have this unique situation where federally recognized Indian tribes are also sovereign, and they have the right to have casinos, well, as long as there's a casino in the state. Now they have the right to have sports betting. The reason there's a question mark is they may have some other right. They have written agreements with the states, like state of Florida, Michigan, California, that only the Indian tribes can have casinos, and they'll give Connecticut, they'll give the state hundreds of millions of dollars a year, so long as nobody opens up any other form of what is called Class 3 gambling, which is casinos. So if there were private casinos, the state loses hundreds of millions of dollars. Or something nobody ever thought about, sports betting. So if a state allows someone other than the Indian tribe to have sports betting, they might lose a couple $100 million a year. The leagues and the colleges, the NCAA, oppose this. They are big winners. First of all, they want 1% off the top. They want billions of dollars, which they're not going to get. But imagine what is going to happen in terms of advertising revenue. Because we know with like fantasy sports that when people have money on a sports event, they watch it on TV, and the advertisers therefore make more money. The broadcasters are going to be rolling in money. Colleges will be making more money by being able to sell the rights to broadcasting their games. There is going to be an explosion of interest in sports betting. And one of the reasons this case is so significant, think back to you can only need to go to the 1950s. There wasn't a whole lot of legal gambling around the world. I first visited, in fact, Macau in 1976, and it sure didn't look like this, right? There has been the greatest expansion of legal gambling in the history of the world has occurred since 1960. The only form that really did not keep up with it was sports betting in the United States. Now they're going to have that, and there's going to be a lot more interest because there's going to be a lot more money. This is a state issue. So state politicians are going to be getting lots of donations by contributions, solicitations on, well, here's the way you should do it, and here's the licenses you should be giving. It's probably a really good time to be a lobbyist at the state level because they're going to be making a lot of money. And Congress has already, there's a bill already being introduced in Congress that the federal government should regulate this. Remember what I said, that it is not just sports betting. States can do anything now. States can legalize internet poker. And they're going to. And unlike sports betting, there is a federal law called the Wire Act that makes it impossible, or at least really difficult, to take bets across state lines. Poker, there is no such law. So states are going to begin to realize, hey, we can start doing a lot of other things. States can do anything. Well, that means they can start, there's a big movement to legalize marijuana. Started with medical, now it's recreational. States are going to be doing that. Who are the losers? When you have a monopoly, you make a lot of money. When you don't have a monopoly anymore, then some is going to happen. I put a question mark because I think the Nevada casino and legal sports books are actually going to do quite well for months and even years because there's going to be more interest in it. But the big operators like Caesar's Palace is the biggest sports book in Nevada. People are saying they're going to make a lot of money. Yeah, until somebody in, I don't know, San Francisco says, I don't have to go to Las Vegas to bet. I can go down the street or on the internet. The state of Nevada eventually is going to get hurt because of course, they tax all this. So their tax revenues are probably going to go down. Probably. Maybe they'll go up. The Indian tribes again. The problem for most of the Indian tribes in the United States is they're located on land that is really distant and horrible. And if the state decides that only licensed sports books, physical sports book near cities, like racetracks, casinos can have sports betting. Indian tribes, nobody wants to drive 3 or 4 hours. Who's going to get hurt? For sure, the illegal operators, the gray market. Because why would you risk making a bet with somebody who might not pay you rather than someone in your own state who is going to be licensed by the state? Fantasy sports. There is no fantasy sports in Europe. Nothing like it is, say, in the United States. Because if you have the right to bet on real sports, you're not going to bet on fantasy sports. And I think if you check the news in the last 2 days, they're now talking about buying legal sports books and getting into real sports betting. Some interesting, nobody's thought about this yet, but President Trump, this is going to help illegal aliens in the United States. He cannot order state police to help him round up illegal aliens. He can't order states to do anything about any crime. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who doesn't like marijuana, he can't order the state police to help enforce federal marijuana laws. Questions, though, we do have a lot. Is Congress going to do anything? Well, this Congress doesn't do anything, so it's an easy answer. But the next attack, remember, this is the Wire Act. It says, okay, you can have legal sports betting in New Jersey, according to the Supreme Court. You can't take bets from China or anywhere else in the world, or even, New York, you are stuck. That's the only form of legal betting where you can't take bets across state lines. The leagues want national regulations. They might want it. I don't know if they're going to get it. For Macau, the big question, and I don't know the answer to this, is can territories also have sports betting like Saipan? Can the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, Guam, and Puerto Rico, which has 3.5 million people, can they have sports betting under this decision? My guess is no. I haven't done the research yet, but remember the basic idea was the states were sovereigns. They created the federal government. They gave some of their power. Territories weren't involved. The territories are the opposite. The federal government has a big piece of land somewhere and there's 5 people on it, so they decided to call it a territory. I don't think the territories have the same power, but there's sure going to be a lot of big lawsuits. And then what the big news has been, since everybody who read my material for the last few years knew this decision was coming, was the leagues say they need a 1% integrity fee, 1% off the top on every single bet. That's billions of dollars. There's only a couple problems. First of all, how come they're only concerned about integrity now? I mean, that doesn't quite make sense. More importantly, they don't have any bargaining power. They have nothing to sell. The leagues and the teams own the intellectual property on the games, but not on the results. You cannot copyright facts. So anybody can take bets on a game without violating the league's copyright. More questions. Who's going to be first? I don't think anybody's ever seen this before. There are 3 states that have passed laws already that said if the U.S. Supreme Court legalizes sports betting, then we've got sports betting. Well, they've now legalized sports betting. They overturned PASPA. I was the legal advisor to the state of Delaware when it reintroduced sports books about 10 years ago. They were one of those states that is allowed to have sports betting, and everybody kind of ignores them, but they've got them. They're up and operating. They just can't they only can take parlay bets at the moment. You have to predict the winner of 3 separate events. Now they can go back to they can do straight up betting like Nevada. I have been telling them for years they should be taking bets over the internet and on telephone. Unfortunately, you still have to be physically in the same state. Some states are going to have real problems, though, because even though they have the power under the U.S. federal constitution, under their own state constitution, maybe you got to have amendment. And if there are like an Indian tribe that doesn't want it, they'll put up hundreds of millions of dollars. In a state like California, which has a population greater than Canada, who's going to get the licenses? The fight over this literally is hundreds of millions of dollars. And there are already, I went to a conference just a couple of months ago where people are saying, well, maybe we can figure out a way around that Federal Wire Act, and maybe we can take sports bets from everywhere in the world. I don't think so, but it's always possible. Did I do it in less than 20 minutes? Great. Okay, thank you, and thank you again for inviting me. I always really love coming here. Thank you.